I was just completely baffled. And speaking to my friends all night, we were just we were furious, but also there was a sort of air of almost surreal gallows humor about it at times when we were watching the protest, because we were thinking, this is Southport. This is the very opposite of Southport.
Mm.
This is ridiculous to see race riots whipped up by the far right on the streets of Southport. When there were riots in 2011, we sort of joked amongst ourselves when we were at school. We said, imagine if there were riots in Southport. And now when I tell people I'm from Southport, they won't be saying, oh, where's that? Is it Stockport? They'll be thinking, oh, yeah, with the horrific child murders and the race riots, which is really, really sick and upsetting for anyone with a connection to the town.
There is always something about where you grew up and what it means to you, and what, when you say to someone Southport, what they're, or wherever it is you're from, what they straight away come back with. They either might not have heard of where you're from, or they associate something with it. How do you, how would you describe Southport, first of all?
Well, as I say in the piece, Asma, and it's almost sick to say this now, people tend to grow up in Southport because it's the safest place to raise kids on Merseyside. If you are a Scouser or if you come from elsewhere, you move to Southport because it's quiet, because the houses are a little bit bigger than they are in Liverpool. You can have a garden, it's sunny, it's by the beach, and you don't necessarily have to worry about where your kids are, and nothing bad ever happens in Southport. As I write in the paper, the town's great tragedy used to be a lifeboat disaster that happened in 1886 that people still talk about. So that's Southport. That's why people live in Southport, for a better life, or people visit, and you have to really look for it. The motorway links are terrible. People visit for a nicer day or move for a better life. And that's why it's been really difficult, even for those of us like me who are lucky enough not to have lost family or have been directly affected, why it's so difficult to see and hear the town being spoken of in the way it has been this week.
And the geography of all of this, I'm thinking about the kind of, because we hear about Hart Street. And again, that won't mean anything to anyone who's not from Southport. What is Hart Street? What was it like when you were growing up? And what do you make of how it looked after the violent protests, and also the way that it looked when everyone cleaned it up?
Yeah, well, I know Hart Street and St Luke's Road, where the protest was, incredibly well. That it's really surreal in that one of my mum's best friends from nursing training college lived in a house that's right opposite the entrance to that dance studio. So on Saturdays we would go there, and it was, a very, very quiet street. There was a pub at the end called the Blue Anchor where I very occasionally drink, and it's not the sort of place you imagine a national tragedy to happen. It's a quiet suburban street about a mile out of the town centre, and again, you would have to really, really go looking for it, and that the alleged perpetrator clearly did, which is why again it's so baffling. And St Luke's Road again, very quiet, working class area. My parents got married in the church that gives the road its name. I was christened in that church, and seeing it full of yobs and morons chucking bricks at police officers, most of them not from Southport, and sadly you could recognise a few sandgrounders, to use our phrase, in the crowd. I was just completely baffled, and speaking to my friends all night, we were just we were furious, but also there was a sort of air of almost surreal gallows humor about it at times when we were watching the protest, because we were thinking, this is Southport. This is the very opposite of Southport. This is ridiculous to see race riots whipped up by the far right on the streets of Southport. When there were riots in 2011, we sort of joked amongst ourselves when we were at school. We said, imagine if there were riots in Southport. And now when I tell people I'm from Southport, they won't be saying, oh, where's that? Is it Stockport? They'll be thinking, oh, yeah, with the horrific child murders and the race riots, which is really, really sick and upsetting for anyone with a connection to the town.
I was trying to work out where the mosque and the Muslim community figure in Southport. I presume it's quite a small population. Do you know the mosque at all?
I had a friend from school who used to go to that mosque. His parents, his dad was Moroccan and he ran a hotel. His mum was French. And that's the sort of Muslim community in Southport. This isn't I mean, no disrespect to these places at all. Southport is not a Rochdale or an Oldham or a Blackburn, which isn't far away. You know, there is no great immigrant community in Southport. You know, you have individual immigrants who might have moved elsewhere in the northwest, lots of second generation people, but it is a very homogenous place. And I remember, you know, relatives of mine who lived in London coming up once and saying, you know, everybody here is white, and obviously there are, and that's an exaggeration, but
Yeah.
that's the sense you get from you know, it's an older place, it's a quite ethnically homogenous place. So the idea that, you know, I'm reading Catherine Burblesing, the headmistress, talking about, you know, Southport as a sign that multiculturalism has failed, and like right-wing agitators talking nonsense like that. It's sort of like, if you had been, you would know how absurd a statement this is. It is, you know, the immigrants come to Southport and people get on with each other. There is no racial tension to speak of in the town because it's a tolerant place and it's a town full of quiet people trying to get on with their lives, and they've come to Southport to get on with their lives. It's not like that at all.
Just last question, really. I mean, you know, everything is so grim right now. It feels really grim. There's some terrible, you know, terrible news stories. I mean, it's more than a news story, isn't it? What happened to these poor children? But the one kind of small ray of light was, and it was mostly men. The next day, rebuilding that wall. That made me incredibly happy, just seeing people do that, and they made the place look, you know, completely sparkling clean the next day. Presumably, you know, you feel really strongly about where you grew up. If you had been there the night after, do you think that's something that you would you have helped with the cleanup? Would you have felt that kind of that strongly about it?
Oh, look, absolutely. If I've been out of bed in time, which is always touch and go, I definitely would have got up. But you know, watching from afar, and I have been really proud of how the community reacted and how it's reacted to these riots, and it's been very reassuring that, you know, everyone I know from Southport, and I'm still in touch with all of my mates from school. I'm going to Southport tomorrow for a wedding. And you know, everybody thought this was a total disgrace, and you know, if I'd been there, I would have, you know, been first out there with the broom, provided I was awake. But there we go.
Patrick, thank you very much for talking to us. That is Patrick Maguire. He is from Southport. He is Times Radio's senior political correspondent. I know that we spent a lot of the programme urging you to read particular pieces in the Times, but it's such a beautiful piece, and I knew nothing about Southport. The only thing I knew about Southport was the Southport Weekender, which was a music festival. That was the limit of my knowledge. And it's such a beautiful piece. It's a kind of understated love letter to where you grew up. And I would completely recommend reading that piece because it's so good.